It was a crisp Saturday morning when Barron Trump decided to step out alone for a quiet stroll through the city streets. He wanted to enjoy a rare moment of anonymity, blending in with the crowd. Dressed in a simple hoodie and jeans, he looked just like any other teenager. The simplicity of it all brought him a sense of calm, until he found himself wandering into a quaint, old-fashioned shop on the corner of Main Street. The shopkeeper, an older man with a gruff demeanor, eyed him the moment he walked in. Barron could feel the weight of the man's gaze, judgmental and piercing. The store was filled with vintage trinkets, books, and collectibles, and Barron's eyes lit up when he spotted a unique chess set on one of the shelves. He carefully picked it up, running his fingers over the intricate carvings. But before he could admire it further, the shopkeeper's voice boomed across the room. "Hey, kid, put that down," the man barked, startling Barron. He turned to face the shopkeeper, who was now storming towards him with an expression of disdain. "This isn't a place for kids like you," the man added, his tone laced with bitterness. Barron blinked, confused. "I was just looking. Looking? You don't look like you can afford anything in here," the shopkeeper interrupted, his words cutting like a blade. The other customers in the shop turned to watch the scene unfold, their faces a mix of curiosity and discomfort. Barron's cheeks flushed with a mix of embarrassment and anger, but he remained calm. "I wasn't going to damage it," he said softly, setting the chess set back on the shelf. But the shopkeeper wasn't done. "Do you know how expensive that is? Kids like you think they can just waltz in here and touch whatever they want. Get out before you break something." Barron hesitated, unsure of how to respond. He wasn't used to being spoken to like this, especially not in public. For a moment, he considered walking out, letting the insult slide, but something in him refused to back down. He straightened his posture, meeting the shopkeeper's glare head-on. "I can afford it," he said firmly, his voice steady but calm, "and I wasn't going to break anything." The shopkeeper let out a derisive laugh. "Sure you can, and I'm the President of the United States," he sneered, clearly unaware of who he was speaking to. The crowd murmured, some shaking their heads at the shopkeeper's rudeness, while others seemed intrigued by Barron's quiet confidence. Barron reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet, calmly flipping it open. He didn't say a word, but the sight of his black card, a symbol of immense wealth, spoke volumes. The shopkeeper's face shifted, his smug expression faltering for just a moment before he regained his composure. "You think flashing money around impresses me?" the man scoffed, though his voice wavered slightly. "This isn't about money. It's about respect." Barron tilted his head, his blue eyes sharp and piercing. "Respect goes both ways," he replied, his words carrying a weight that silenced the room. Before the shopkeeper could respond, a young boy, no older than 7, tugged at Barron's sleeve. The child had been standing nearby, clutching a small toy car he had clearly been admiring. "Are you going to buy that chess set?" the boy asked innocently, his wide eyes full of hope. Barron crouched down to the boy's level, his expression softening. "Do you like chess?" he asked, genuinely curious. The boy nodded enthusiastically. "My grandpa taught me. I want to get better so I can play with him more." Barron smiled and stood up, turning back to the shopkeeper. "How much for the chess set?" he asked, his tone neutral but firm. The shopkeeper hesitated, his earlier bravado fading. It's $500, he stammered. Without a word, Barron pulled out the cash and handed it over, then picked up the chess set and handed it to the boy. "Here, practice hard and beat your grandpa," he said with a wink. The boy's face lit up with pure joy, and the crowd burst into applause. The shopkeeper, now visibly flustered, tried to mutter an apology, but Barron raised a hand to stop him. "You were right about one thing. Barron said quietly, his voice carrying an edge. Respect matters. As Barron turned to leave, the crowd parted to let him through, their eyes filled with admiration. But just as he reached the door, an older woman approached him, her face pale and anxious. "Young man," she said, her voice trembling, "I think you should know. There's something about that shopkeeper you might want to hear." Barron paused, curiosity flickering in his eyes. "What do you mean?" he asked, sensing that the story was far from over. The older woman glanced around nervously, as if unsure whether she should continue. The shopkeeper, now visibly uneasy, watched her like a hawk. But she took a deep breath and stepped closer to Barron. "That man," she began, her voice low. "He wasn't always like this. His name is Mr. Holton. He used to be kind. Generous, even. But he's been through things most of us can't imagine. Losing his family, his home, he's bitter now, but there's a reason for it." Barron's brows furrowed. He glanced back at the shopkeeper, who was fidgeting behind the counter, pretending to rearrange items while avoiding eye contact. The man's earlier hostility now seemed more like a shield than a weapon. "What happened to him?" Barron asked quietly. The woman hesitated. "A fire. About 3 years ago, his house burned down. He lost his wife and son that night. Everything he cared about. Since then, he's been different. He rebuilt his life. But the man you see now isn't the man he used to be." The words hit Barron harder than he expected. The scene in the shop replayed in his mind, but now every sharp word and angry glare from Mr. Holton seemed less like hatred and more like pain poorly masked. Barron stood there for a moment, conflicted. He could walk out and leave the past where it lay, but something deep inside him refused to let go of the story unfolding before him. Turning back to the shopkeeper, Barron approached the counter again. The room grew silent, the weight of the unspoken tension thick in the air. "Mr. Holton," Barron said, his voice soft but steady. The man looked up sharply, his face a mixture of guilt and defensiveness. "I didn't know about what you've been through. I'm sorry for your loss." The shopkeeper's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing as if bracing himself against the unexpected compassion. "Why would you care?" he snapped. "You don't know me." "You're right," Barron replied. "I don't. But I know what it's like to lose things, to feel like the world expects you to keep moving forward, even when you can't." For a moment, the shopkeeper looked like he might lash out again. But then something cracked. His shoulders slumped, the anger in his eyes fading to exhaustion. He let out a long, shuddering breath and sank into the chair behind the counter. "Every day feels like a punishment," Mr. Holton admitted quietly, his voice breaking. "I lost everything that mattered, and now I don't even know why I'm still here." The room fell into a hush. The customers, once irritated by the scene, now looked on with sympathy. Even the little boy with the chest set clutched in his arms watched with wide, solemn eyes. Barron leaned forward, his tone resolute. "You're still here because you matter. Maybe you don't see it now, but you're still part of this world for a reason." Mr. Holton looked up, his eyes glistening. "And what reason would that be?" Barron smiled faintly. "Maybe it's to see that even after everything you've lost, there's still good left. Maybe it's to let people remind you that it's okay to start again." The shopkeeper said nothing, but the tension in his face eased. Barron straightened, pulling a business card from his pocket. He set it gently on the counter. "If you ever need help rebuilding, let me know." With that, Barron turned and walked toward the door. The little boy ran after him, tugging at his sleeve one last time. "Thank you," the boy said, his voice full of gratitude. Barron knelt and ruffled the boy's hair. "Make sure you win that chess game, okay?" he said with a grin before standing and stepping outside. As the door closed behind him, he could hear the murmur of voices in the shop. A ripple had started. A small moment of change. Mr. Holton stared at the card on the counter, his hands trembling slightly as he picked it up. For the first time in years, a flicker of hope sparked in his tired eyes. Outside, Barron walked down the street, his pace unhurried. The morning that had begun with hostility had ended with something far more meaningful. A reminder that even in the harshest moments, empathy could change everything.